All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine, Women, and Words. I am Michelle, and with me, of course, is Diana.
Hello.
And we have tonight our special guest for December, author Mary Volmer. And thank you so much for joining us tonight, Mary. We're so excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
We've been talking about and reading your book, Reliance, Illinois, all month. And we're really excited to have you on tonight. How was your Christmas? I guess since we're stuck in that like nowhere, that kind of like dead zone between Christmas and New Year's where you don't really know what to do with your life.
The tree's up. Do you take it down? Do you wait till after? Yeah, no, it's good. We had family all around. I'm at my parents' house, so I'm in the room that I grew up in, which is a little odd but fun. And my son is sleeping in the other room. Should be sleeping in the other room. So it has been fun. Cousins, who can beat cousins as friends? They're wonderful.
Cousins are the best. I love my cousins.
Yeah, they're great.
I've got too many cousins, but the ones I do know are really great. I come from a very large family, so I'm one of 28 first cousins.
Oh my goodness. Do you have reunions?
Between both sides of the family.
Do you have,
sorry, what was that?
Do you have family reunions where you all gather?
No, not really. We're all kind of scattered to the wind. My mom was the youngest of four. I'm sorry. My mom was the youngest of four. My dad was the youngest of five.
Okay.
And most of us keep in contact, in touch on Facebook and stuff. So yeah, there's some in the South, some back East, some out here on the West Coast. I'm kind of like, Betty White's character from Golden Girls.
Oh.
They always had a story about a cousin, and it was random and quirky. And that's my family.
Well, I guess technically I'm not the youngest cousin anymore because I have kids. But I was, of my cousins, I'm the baby by a few years. So I was always kind of like, I didn't really grow up with them, but I always felt like the kid sister that like would run after them saying, "Hey guys."
And there weren't that many girls for mine. I don't know about you, Mary, with your cousins, but I was one of the few girls.
Oh yeah, I'm the only girl. Well, not really. On one side, I'm the only girl. I have girls on the other side.
We had some rough and tumble girls in our family, and so we always got in boots and cowboy hats and went out into Elko, Nevada, was where my cousins lived, and we thought we were cowboys. So we'd go out and lasso sagebrush and do all kinds of crazy things, and we were never real comfortable being girls, I don't think. We never grew out of that either.
Yeah. I think part of the reason why I have so many like feminist ways and I'm so like very go get them in your face is because I had so many male cousins. I had some female cousins too, but I was around the male cousins more. And I was the little one, and that meant I was the one who was tortured the most.
And you had to keep up.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can't. I mean, there's stories, and one of them will never let me babysit for his kids with good reason. Yeah, payback's a bitch. But yeah, I think cousins help shape you almost as much as siblings.
Yeah, no, mine certainly have. As close as siblings in some ways.
Well, we should probably start talking about the book because I literally just read the last paragraph like an hour ago.
Oh my, yeah.
It was with Christmas and finals and everything. It's always a very interesting scheduling pattern to find reading time. But
before you go into that though, Michelle, for those of you who are listening, we do have spoilers. There is a potential for that. So if you've not finished the book yet, it's a good time to shut off the podcast until you finish the book. And then
yeah, definitely spoilers. Absolutely.
Yeah, so go ahead and just put us on pause while you finish the book.
So, and when I first started reading it, I did definitely Google, because I'm up in northern Chicago, about an hour north of Chicago. So I definitely Googled Reliance, Illinois to see how far away I was from it. And then I kind of read the first couple sentences of your acknowledgments, and I saw that Reliance wasn't an actual town. So where did your, but I didn't read all of the acknowledgments because I feel like I don't want to spoil any questions I might have. So where did your idea for the town itself come from?
You know, the name Reliance occurred to me quite early, but I think the primary influence was reading Self-Reliance by Emerson and realizing this wonderful essay applied to men, but not women who did not have the opportunity to have the education or the political autonomy that they would need to be self-reliant. And so a woman's world was very much a world of reliance and dependence and interdependence. And so as I read more about the time and more about the dark years after the American Civil War, where there were hundreds and thousands of young men who had died, that community of women who relied on one another and who were seeking out across the country for other communities in which to create a new home, that was what interested me. And then once I had that, I realized it set the thematic overtone for the whole book, which I really liked. So it wasn't a response anymore to Emerson in the end. It was the jumping off point for the thematic umbrella that kind of held the book together to me when I'm looking at these two coming of age stories of these two women who happen to be mother and daughter going through the story.
Oh, now the title makes. I love it when the authors explain like some of their ideas for the books, because then it's like, yeah, I get this dawning like, oh, now I totally get the title. I totally understand it now. And so yeah, now I totally get the title, and I love it even more. Now, do you think, touching on what you were saying about the Civil War with so many people, young men dying, and that were, do you think that played a role in the suffragist movement? Because that got really big after the Civil War.
It was really big before. So 1848 was the Seneca Falls Convention. And so that was the first big convention.
Okay.
And then during the Civil War, a lot of the suffragists put their work on hold to support abolition in full. And it wasn't until after the Civil War that the suffrage movement started to make some grounds again. But they hit a stumbling block when the 15th Amendment came around, which said all persons shall have the right to vote. Victory, right? But it was changed. It was changed because they were afraid they wouldn't get suffrage for men and black men and all women through Congress. So they changed the language to all men shall have the right to vote. And this actually fractured the suffrage movement after the Civil War into two competing factions. I think Miss Rose and Miss French in the book kind of represent these two ideas of how to attack this problem and how to gain suffrage. So it was kind of a dark ages of the women's suffrage movement that lasted until 1919. So you had these very strong personalities like Miss Rose, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who were sure that after the Civil War and abolition came into being, they would win the vote. It was just the right time. And they were terribly disappointed. They were overcome with anger, I think, in some ways, because their vision of equality wasn't ever enjoyed in their own lifetimes. It was Maddie and her generation that enjoyed suffrage, these young things who had no idea what the battle had even been before. So, excuse me, I can't even remember your question, but
no, we're doing it quite well. I mean, it's that I know Greer McAllister and I have talked about it, the progression of history, where it's not just necessarily linear. It's you take a few steps forward and then take a step back, and it's so very relatable to that. And that also brought up another question for me is, and something I've been thinking about through the book. Now, you said Mrs. French and Rose represented two specific different fractions of the suffragist movement. were there any specific suffragettes that maybe influenced those characters?
You know, at first I had that most of my characters are amalgamations of women. I read a lot of biographies. So Mrs. French, the relationship between the two, Mrs. French and Miss Rose, grew out of a relationship I read from a book called Unsettling the West, which was about Eliza Farnham. And I think I sent you, Dana, a link about her.
Yes, yes, and I wrote about her for Feast Femme Friday.
Oh, good. And another woman named Georgiana Bruce Kirby, who lived together, worked together, but had just entirely different ideas about how to approach the woman question. And so I wanted to put these two contentious yet respectful people in the same house at the same time. And the blue stocking era, this is the middle of the blue stocking era. So it's not unusual for this, especially after the American Civil War. But Rose was an amalgamation. She was one part Fanny Kimball, who was a stage actress. She was Sarah Bernhardt. In fact, she says some things Sarah Bernhardt said in her biography that I cite at the end of the book. She was Victoria Woodhull, who was the first woman to run for president in 1872. I was
so excited when her name came up because I'm kind of a Victoria Woodhull fangirl after Nicole Evangelina's book. I had read that, and that kind of turned me into a fangirl for Victoria.
We should all be fangirls of Victoria Woodhull.
We really should be. She was just that awesome, and I got so excited when her name came up. I was like, ah!
And she was one of these people
like a Star
too.
Wars
Like, to say again, I'm sorry, I missed that.
I was like, it's like a Star Wars reference in like some random show. It's like, oh my gosh. Okay, now carry on.
She was famous. These women were famous in their time, and why is it that so few people know the name Victoria Woodhull, or Mary Livermore, or Olympia Brown? We know Katie Stanton. We know a few. Lucretia Mott. We know a few, but those are few and far between of the women who made really profound changes in the way in which we see femininity and womanhood. And their voices have been lost. And so my amalgamated characters are in some way speaking in tongues. They're speaking a lot of different ideas. And the challenge was to kind of create one character, one body to contain them each. So Farnham, Eliza Farnham, her appearance and her very unattractive features, I think I've given Mrs. French, although Mrs. French is far more attractive than Eliza was in her day. But her voice isn't. You notice Miss French's voice is very thin. It doesn't carry the profundity of her ideas with any kind of strength.
Yeah, she struck me as a person who would be more comfortable with books than she would be with people.
Yeah. And she was one of a generation of women lawyers in Illinois and in Chicago in particular, led by Myra Bradwell, who passed the bar but was never allowed to practice law because she was woman and then because she was a wife. The language with which they prevented her from doing this was just
God forbid.
God forbid.
Damn it, I don't have a pen on it because every time I talk to Mary online, I always end up walking away with somebody new to research to include in my blog. If I ever am stuck on who to cover for Feast Femme Friday, all I have to do is just send a message over to Mary, and I've got like 3 weeks worth.
Do you know Myra Bradwell? She'd be great. She
would be, yeah.
She's a wonderful person, and she's right there where you are, Michelle. She's up in Chicago. She was there before and after the Great Fire. I don't know when that was, 71 or 72, 1871. Too. So
and
a lot of these women.
For 2018, I'm trying to be proactive with my first Femme Friday. We'll see how long it lasts.
Someone is awake. Which one is it?
We're all quiet to see which kid, which of kids is awake. Who's gonna come visit?
I think it's Landon. Yep, sure is. Hey, buddy.
Oh.
What's the matter? Oh, did Daddy wake you up?
So, as you were saying with Myra Bradwell?
Yeah.
She, these are people that we didn't know. And it's true. I mean, we don't learn about them in history classes. So much of what I've learned about women's history has been all my own research.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
And then there's, I think Aaron McCabe talked about
mhm,
this too. And part of it is that the history that's recorded in history books, the dates and the names are attached somehow to politics and war.
mhm,
And if you take women, when women aren't allowed in either of those spheres, and that's the sphere in which you honor in history, then of
mhm,
course you're not going to have a record. Where those records live are in diary journals, and in the case of Mary Livermore, in autobiographies, in letters home, in correspondence. And that kind of research is happenstance. There's a lot of holes in the record.
mhm,
Where are those records? They could be in somebody's aunt's closet in the way back, and how would you even discover that? They're often not in libraries. So I
mhm,
think those of us who are not academics but who do serious research are doing a great service by uncovering those kinds of sources and bringing them to the light.
mhm. Yeah, it's funny when I started creating her story initially. It was going to be just, 'cause my focus for my future books, if I ever do get them published,
Yeah.
is Italian American history and immigrant history. And initially, I was focusing on that, and then I was like, well, there's other women out there. I need to learn about this. And for like a brief moment, like literally maybe about 30 seconds, I had this thought of, oh my God, what if I run out of women to write about? And that lasted 30 seconds. And here I am, what is it, 3 years later with the vlog. And it's like every day is a learning experience. I'm learning somebody new. So it's been a great, tool for me to be able to learn from.
Yeah.
Um,
I do a library talk called Imagining History's Lost Voices, and most of it set with my first book, Crown of Dust. But I
mhm.
think I'm gonna develop one for this one too, sometime. So eventually.
Yes.
But part of the talk is a call to action, because if these
Mhm,
records are indeed in the hands of people like you and me, then people
mhm,
like you and me need to take those records seriously and find those journals and read
mhm,
those journals and bring those voices to life. Uh,
mhm,
and that I think that more and more you're going to find, because of the internet, the democratization of that kind of information, and it'll
mhm.
be accessible to you and me whether or not we have a great Aunt Joan who has a great shoebox full of letters. We'll still be able to access Joan's correspondence because somebody will have documented them online.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, the internet's really great for that. Um, Michelle, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I was thinking about one of the big things for Maddie at the beginning of the book, or throughout the book, was that she wanted to be beautiful because she felt one of the things that she wrote in her one of her first lessons was that beauty was the key to, oh gosh, I forget what she said, but beauty was the key to the world, basically.
Yeah, unlock
Um,
love, I think she
right, thank you.
Yeah. I love
And
that phrase. I love what she wrote there.
and I think what she learns, or what I picked up while reading it, is as you learned Rose's secret, which kind of scared the heck out of me the first time you you meet
Maddie.
her. I was like, wait, who is that, a ghost that she just saw? Um, but I think what she learned as she went through the book is that beauty can sometimes be a burden because women are expected to be beautiful. And if they're not beautiful, then they may not be taken seriously, or as seriously as women would be taken during that time. So
Sure.
I feel like it was almost a lesson to her to learn that it's okay that she looks the way she looks.
Yeah, well, and Beauty was no asset to her mother.
Mhm,
Beauty made her mother a victim, and it made her vulnerable to the gaze of men and to the and Maddie is not going to have that same problem in the same way. Although that's not to say that she's immune to that kind of violence.
Mm-hmm.
But she is going to have to find another asset. Miss Rose uses that phrase. What asset do you have beyond your beauty? And in the 19th century, that was the asset women had. Your appeal to the opposite sex, your profession to become a wife, was one of the only professions available, and that's changing in Maddie's lifetime. And Miss Rose, who has been a theater director, which was one of the only professions open to women, wherein they had power over men. If they were owned a theater, they were boss, which explains perhaps why it was also considered just above a body house as far as how moral it was, the theater itself. Um, yeah, she does, and none of these ideas that Miss Rose or Miss French are in fact contemporary. They're still in circulation, but these are ideas that women from biographies that I had been reading at the time were saying forcefully. And sometimes I had to look back and figure out whether I had coined a phrase or whether I'd stolen it from, one of these journals that I had come across. So that was a huge labor at the end of the book to figure out which of these phrases were actually Miss Rose and Miss French speaking, and which of them I'd unconsciously cribbed. And I've made a pretty careful reference of all of those things. But you could be a teacher until you got married. You can be a nurse until you got married. You could be a whore forever. You could be, a lot of these things. And Mama learns this fast. What does Mama have once she's ruined as a woman by being forced to have sex? She has no options, and she's young, and she has nowhere to turn to. The only thing she has, which she discovers in the book, is the capacity to make something, to make a dress. And that economic freedom is what she learns and what frees her. And I think probably Maddie too. Maddie's going to have to make money. So, chattering on.
No, it's fine. It's just, it's great. I mean, it's great stuff to take into consideration. And bringing up Mama, I loved her character. I know Michelle, it took her a little bit to warm up to her.
I kind of flip-flopped a little bit on Rebecca. Like at first I liked her, and then I didn't like her, and then towards the end I respected her.
Good. I'm glad. You're seeing her through Maddie's eyes in the start. Through Maddie's 13-year-old, frustrated, confused, why are we going to stay with this guy? Mind, and
I hate to break it to you, Michelle. When Lily gets to be 13, she may talk back to you the way Maddie did with her mother. She might not like you. I'm just gonna warn you now. She's gonna like me because I'm gonna be the cool aunt. She might not like you.
Oh yeah, those complicated mama relationships. I think Maddie says something about swinging like a pendulum between love and hate, so that she hardly even understood when she was in one side and when she was another. And oh God, I think it doesn't matter where you come from. That's true.
I've actually heard it said that when a daughter is born, she does everything she can to push away from her mother. And that's her lot in life, is just to try to break away from her mother, whereas the mother does everything she can to keep the child close to her.
Oh, poor mom.
I know.
You too, Michelle. Enjoy Lily while you can.
It's just going to be a lot of wine during those teenage years.
Well, I mean, I never had. My mom and I are really close, and we've always been really close. And so the research I had to do for Maddie and her mom was probably rooted mostly in the stories my students told me at school about what they were struggling with and how difficult their relationships were. So that was hard, and I didn't understand why Rebecca was acting as she was acting at first either. She was quite frustrating until I understood her as Maddie learned to understand her. And then when I went to revise the book, then the challenge was to make sure I leave out enough of Rebecca so that we discover her, but also Maddie discovers her over the course of this story. And I think she does. I think she discovers who the woman is that she was born to, and learns to love herself, even if mom can't quite manage it as moms should.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca, she's very much a product of her environment and her
Mm.
situation. I loved it when, she asked when, you find out that Maddie got left with Dot, and she asked, "Why did you leave me?" Because of you. Well, then why did you come back? And Rebecca's response was, "Because of you." And that right there just said so much about her character and her motives. It was just everything right there. And I absolutely love that portion of it because it was so revealing for Rebecca's character because she's trying and she tries to do right by her kid, but yet she's kind of limited by what she could do. I mean, if it was another day
Yeah.
or time, of course she would be doing something else. Um, but yeah, like I said, she's a product of her environment.
Mm-hmm. And she's a camp follower too. She's
Mm-hmm.
from this generation of women who grew up with a few men, marriageable men around. So had it not been wartime, she might have found somebody to marry her, and that would have been her path in life. If she had her first child at 13, then you can imagine how many children this woman probably would have had by the time she was 30. That could have been her lot. But this is 10 years after the American Civil War, and
Mm-hmm.
the book was as much about the women left behind in the ashes of that war as it was about the children who were born in the dark shadow of that war, and what it was
Mm-hmm.
like to grow up in the midst of that kind of crisis, ongoing crisis. Very few uh, books I'd read, fiction, considered a character after the war. It was always looking at the drama during. But
Mm-hmm.
I was living in 2000 whatever in the shadow of however many wars back in the Middle East. They say seem to be the shadow. The
Mm-hmm.
shadow is long and still affects not only military families but whole communities.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And oh, I just had a question and it flew straight out of my head. Oh, not a question, but a comment that and after she's at Miss Rose's house and everyone is talking about when William and Rose and another gentleman go and visit her father in his bedroom, and they're talking about him like he isn't there, and they're saying, everything that he accomplished and everything that he predicted, and uh, Maddie's thinking, they're talking about these events, or they're talking about time, like as if a time existed before the war.
Right.
That there was something that happened that existed before that, because that's all she's known, and that kind of goes back to what you just said, that she's growing up in the shadow of something that tore the country apart, and they don't know what's going to happen now.
Right. And it's still not back together. I mean, we're still suffering similar rifts in ideals. I think that stem from this moment, this
Yeah, absolutely
incomplete
right.
moment
There's
of,
actually a sociological study on that.
oh, maybe, probably.
There was, yeah, I remember seeing the study on it. That we are just as divided as we were during the Civil War, and we are divided right along the same lines
Hmm.
as we were during the Civil War. For Union versus Confederate. Not the
Well, you
ideals
look at
haven't really
after.
changed.
Oh, sorry. I
No, go
can
ahead.
see that I'm still talking over you. uh, After the World War II, you also saw there's kind of patterns of social behavior, and I'm not a sociologist, but I just recognize this as in the product of the research, is that after the war, everybody kind of adopts this nostalgic reminiscence of how it was before the war. And
Mm-hmm.
what that does is it creates, at least in these two eras, a backlash against the rights women have gained.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're going to return to before the war, then all the women who had been running the factories and making the munitions and running the sanitary societies, they need to go back and
Mm-hmm.
believe again that their primary place is in the home.
Mm-hmm.
There were women like Mary Livermore who, before the American Civil War, before organizing huge numbers of people all over the country to provide food and medical supplies to the Union, didn't believe that suffrage was something that she should have. She didn't believe that women should have it. After the war, after having run what was essentially a company herself with the
Mm-hmm.
help of other women, she decided that yes, we should have the vote, but the country wasn't ready for that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the moral backlash against women. If you're going to return to a better ideal place, then we need to kind of impose these ideas of morality that never really existed anyway. Like birth control. We can talk about birth control all night if you want, but
Yeah, totally. I'm researching Emma Goldman and the anarchist movement
oh,
of
great.
the early 1900s now. Yeah, I'm in the process of editing one book and starting and researching the next one. And yeah, birth control. I could talk about that all night too, and how women got arrested, and it was this
Yeah.
whole big deal. Um, yeah, and then we're still fighting that birth control battle, something that should have been settled almost 100 years ago.
Yeah, or more than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's true. There's a book by Ursula Le Guin, The Left Hand of Darkness, that
Mm-hmm.
imagines a hermaphroditic person going to another world in which the humanoids here are they don't reveal themselves as one gender or another till the moment of coitus.
Oh, really?
So so
Interesting.
this means so this means that you don't know whether you're going to get pregnant or the other person's going to get pregnant, because you don't know whether you're going to be the boy or the girl in the act
Uh-huh.
until the act begins. And so the result is there's like universally accessible birth control, great childcare, because there's no debate about whether this is moral or not. It's just that everybody needs it because everybody has an equal
Yeah.
chance of getting pregnant.
That's an interesting story premise.
Oh, Ursula Le Guin is a goddess. she's she's amazing.
And
It's yeah, it sounds like something like you'd recently seen like like Orville or some other sci-fi show going on. It's such a great premise. I love it.
It's a
Now I'm
good.
listening. New book
It's
to
a
add to my
challenging book.
reading list. See,
Yeah.
talk to Mary. You wind up with like 5 women to go follow and research.
Well, anarchists. There's a book. Have you read Joan Sibler's Fools?
No, but I will now.
It's set. I think it starts in the 20s, 1920s. But anarchist is kind of the what holds the linked stories together. It's very good. It's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it'd be any use to you, but
I would, because right now I'm really studying the philosophy and theory, and I'm reading Emma Goldman, Living My Life, which is about yay.
right.
Um, yeah, because she was my main character's best friend in the anarchist movement. So I'm like, okay,
Oh,
there's
okay.
not much on, because I'm writing about Maria Rota, and so there's not much on Maria Rota, but there's a whole lot on Emma. So I can learn from
Yeah.
Emma a lot of what Maria's thoughts and feelings
Sure.
were.
Sure.
Uh,
Well, that
so
sounds
yeah.
great.
Yeah, and so yeah, she talks a lot about that, and then it's interesting comparing the suffragist movement the to like the anarchist movement, and like Emma's thoughts and opinions on the matter
Mm-hmm.
versus the suffragettes, because they didn't really get along. That's like a whole nother third faction that I've been seeing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and that's a myth. The myth of unity is an enduring myth, and
mhm,
and people are constantly fractured over even if they want the same larger goal, how to achieve
mhm,
that goal is always in question, and how to
mhm,
define and who is it that gets to benefit, who's
mhm,
left out. When they changed the language from all persons to all men, they took women out of the equation. But what
mhm,
they also did is took people who would have voted in favor of um, civil rights amendments
mhm,
out of the equation. So
mhm,
whereas they did pass the law and they did get suffrage for African American men, there's arguments that Jim Crow rose up as it did because there was no teeth to enforce it. They didn't have a critical mass of numbers to enforce those kinds of laws. They didn't have women.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's assuming, of course, that women would not have been as racist as their male counterpoints, parts, which
I
is a
think there were,
stretch.
yeah, I think, and it's funny because you also have like the suffragette movement where who was saying that women were morally superior. Like I love Farnham's ideas there that women were morally superior, and I remember sending my husband the links. I was like, hey, check this out. Next time we argue, remember this.
Right, morally superior, and yet she didn't believe in the vote.
Yeah, that was interesting. The I love the whole dichotomy too of looking at some of our historical figures where she didn't believe in the vote, but yet she felt women were morally superior.
Yeah.
Or with Emma, one of the kicks I've gotten out of her is she didn't think women were morally superior. She thought if they became part of the system, they would become just as corrupt as the system itself. But she
Yeah.
still felt they should vote.
Yeah. Well, that's what's fun about creating characters too, is that they can inhabit all of these, like Rebecca, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And from some perspective, she's a difficult woman to like at first because you're seeing her through Maddie's eyes. And it's not until you get that's why I like novels, because you can get, over the course of a novel, you can grow these characters
Mm-hmm.
so that you see them from this direction and this direction and this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not want to have coffee with, Melbourne Stockwell. But you might understand him a little bit more. There's at least a chance for empathy that I think fiction offers, and connection to people very unlike yourself in every way, which I enjoy.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about the picture is that you can take that little bit of history and you can fill in the blanks how you want based on the little piece of history that you're able to gather and put together from an incomplete record.
Right. Well, I think that's why, one of the reasons why historical fiction about women is so fruitful now, because the record is incomplete. And so, as frustrating that is for the historian, for the novelist, and the storyteller, that allows for opportunity. And we may not be able to recreate the life of a particular woman, but we might be able to reveal the lives of a whole variety of women by creating a character who inhabits a place and a time in a particular way. And that's a tremendous opportunity. I think the historian who's married to the record doesn't have.
Yeah. And I want to take a few moments here before we get close to the end to talk about William.
I was just gonna say we have to talk about William.
All right.
Okay. I still, even at the end, when all is said and done, I still like William. There, I said it. I liked him.
Michelle, would you like to?
Well, I have mixed feelings about William. I liked Hanley from the first time that he showed up. I liked him, maybe not as who he became for Maddie, but just as a character, I liked him. Yeah. But William, I wanted to like him, and I was never sure if he was going to end up being the person for Maddie.
Yeah.
Oh,
sorry.
And they agree with me.
Yeah, William. So to say I like William is to say I like him as a character. I loved how he just. I loved how he was as a character. I would never want my friends or my daughter to date him.
Yeah,
understandable.
That too.
Yeah, and I think he too is a product of the war. And a lot of these men, post-traumatic stress syndrome wasn't a term at the time, but as a war photographer, you can just imagine what he'd seen and done. And I cut so much of him out of the book.
Really?
When I realized it was Maddie's story, and as compelling as he was to me, and as compelling as the photography as a practice was, it was taking over too much of the story. Which, what was he doing? Mansplaining in my own book? I don't know, but he was
your own book. But yeah, I loved it. I love that relationship that the two of them had. Because, I mean, really, when you look at it, it was he always thought of her as that friend, of that little sister kind of relationship. And I don't know, when he goes and takes off and does what he does with the Stockwells, I'm like, I felt like, ha, in your face.
Yeah.
I felt like the Stockwells got what they deserved.
Yeah.
For it.
Well, he always, I mean, without him, how would he have gotten to Miss Rose's house? He's kind of the bridge between Maddie's two possible lives Maddie could have.
And every girl, really, they have that first crush, that oftentimes that older guy that's around. They want him to be more, and even though he recognizes it, he still sees her as the friend and lets her, he tries to recognize her as a friend too.
And he is attractive. I mean, I can see from a distance how attractive he would be in a town full of single women.
We casted Zachary Levi as William, so I mean, he is attractive. We can attest to that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it has been confirmed that he's definitely good looking.
Who's going to send him the email, you or me? Because
well, it's your book. We'll let you take care of that.
Right. I already cast Miss Rose as Meryl Streep, but she hasn't answered my email yet. So
that's a good one.
I like that. I was thinking about
her picture on my wall, not because I thought she herself was anything like Miss Rose, but I thought she could play. She could play Miss Rose.
She could. I could totally see that now.
Because she could do the vulnerability and the bravado. She could do the whole concert.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Performance.
Yes.
We had Kathy Bates as Dot.
Oh yeah, good one.
And did we have anyone for Maddie and Rebecca yet? I think those were two that we couldn't figure out.
I think Maddie would be for somebody who was, an up and coming girl. Because I mean, you got to start off with a 13-year-old, so
unknown. Yeah, but I have Natalie Portman in my mind for Mama.
Dude, so did I.
Like
I was thinking about that. I was like, Natalie Portman would be good for Mama. She might be good for that.
In fact, Natalie Portman now, she's just got a few wrinkles now, which is, Mama would be 26, but aged, 10 or 15 years older than that for probably.
And Natalie Portman hasn't really aged much since she was 15.
No,
so.
she's
seriously
and mysterious. She could pull it off.
And was it Donald Sutherland for Mr. Dreyfus?
Yep.
That's right.
Oh, I hadn't thought of him. Oh, he did good.
Yes.
We take our fantasy casting very seriously.
Very good. I have my students do this sometimes in class so that they really have to think about character. I'd have them cast characters in books so that they have to.
It's like fantasy football for us.
You need to create that app. Somebody needs to make that app.
We do. Yes. I think it'll be One Woman Award's first actual app.
I'm going to grab this plug-in. I'll be right back.
Okay. So what are you drinking, Mel?
Tell us about your wine.
I'm having a Pinot Grigio, I think. It's very good.
I actually got into the Noble Rot wine.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
I don't know. Did you see the picture I posted of the bottle of wine buried in snow outside?
I saw that. That was. Are you taking all these pictures? Because they're fantastic.
We both do them.
Oh, they're so good.
Oh, thank you.
They take planning and effort, and goodness gracious.
Yeah, I'm like a book photographer.
I'm shaky because I'm holding this darn thing. Okay, I'm gonna unplug this and then see if it works. Okay, I'm back. Not shaky. I'm back.
I know sometimes if I'm trying to take a picture and I'm taking too long, my kids will come to see what I'm doing, or my husband will look at me like I'm crazy. And then you have to edit it, and then you do hashtags. It's a whole process.
Oh yeah, I'm learning a lot about that. I don't know enough about that kind of thing. Probably.
I have the hashtags are great when you want to search for something specifically, or for certain subjects. And I actually have mine saved in a file on my phone in my memo.
I have to do that. I heard that somewhere, and I thought that was brilliant, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, that's what I do. I just save them all there, so when I need to actually make a photo, I'll make a photo, and then I'll just copy and paste them over.
That's
gotta have a system.
Yeah, exactly.
I do have a question. At the very end of the book, there's a date at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's August what is it, August 8th? Hold on, let me get there. August 27th, 1908. And I Googled that date to see if anything specific happened. And Lyndon Johnson was born on that date. But is there a significance for Maddie for that date?
There is. So the first suffrage march in Oakland was held that day for women.
Oh.
And so this is,
and at the end she's actually getting ready for that, and okay.
Yeah, but I liked that. I liked in there because at that moment it's still over 10 years before they actually win the vote. So at this moment, as she's writing, she still doesn't know. This narrator still doesn't know if she will ever see the vote. So those that tone of longing and a hopeful hopelessness, I guess, is that she writes, and she's working for her girls now. It needed a date that was not final. Had it been the day when they'd won the vote, I didn't want it resolved. I wanted the feeling that this fight was going to go on, and that also our fight, however we choose to see that, is ongoing. And we may never know, like Maddie doesn't know that what we fight for will ever come to fruition, and yet she does anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I had an atlas of Oakland in that day and time, so I could figure out whether or not where the march was on the streets as they existed in the early 1900s, so that I knew she would be in a house front where the march would go past, because I needed all those details to be real. Why? Because Michelle might have looked them up.
Michelle looks
I should have thought to put Oakland in my search. I don't know. I just did the date, and I didn't think to include the place.
There's a lovely term Karen Fowler uses, and she says she doesn't write historical fiction. She writes fiction in a place in time, So she doesn't ever separate the two. And I love that. I love the idea that the place and time are interconnected so completely. Because if you look at our lives in 2017, but you look at the lives of Middle Eastern women, the place and time matters a great deal to our two experiences. And that with historical fiction is the same. Even Oakland, from the Midwest to DC, the experiences of a woman, of anyone, is going to be different based on those two nodes, where those two nodes meet. My husband's a mathematician. He could probably tell you mathematically what all that axes intersect, and I would nod and smile.
Sounds like me when it comes to math.
Oh, I love math from a distance.
I don't like it at all from any distance.
I love mathematicians. I guess that's the truth.
I like it far, far, far away from me.
Michelle, no one's ever asked me that. And I've kind of been dying for somebody to ask me about
really
at the end of the book, because it was so intentional. I was so careful about that date and that place, and no one's ever asked me about it before. So thank you.
That's not the first time an author has been like, oh wow, this is the first person who's asked me that.
Yeah, you guys are good.
Yay, thanks. Well, you can't throw a date at the very end of a book with no explanation. Like, it has to mean something.
There's a lot of things.
Journalist in the conversation.
Oh, right, exactly. That makes sense. Yeah. There's a lot of little things, a lot of little inside jokes in the book too, that I don't think anybody will ever find. But one I'll share with you is that the book that Maddie's reading in the beginning on the floor, the history of birds, it's the history of British birds or something strange. It's the book Jane Eyre is reading in the very beginning of.
No way. Okay, so all right, now I see that, and the whole time I'm like, once she actually gets to Miss Rose's house, I kept thinking it feels like Jane Eyre. That's when it struck me that the whole book itself had this Jane Eyre feeling about it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And the great expectations with Mrs. Havisham, Miss Rose. Yeah. You have I was just unabashedly influenced and happily influenced by those books.
Well, see, now when I read it, I will be able to make the comparison because Jane Eyre is on my list.
Oh, you love it. You'll love it.
For this year.
Yes, I've decided, I was talking about it with Diana during one episode, that I haven't really read any really classics. I've never gotten around to it. So I'm doing a classic journey next year. I picked 12 books and I'm going to read one a month, and Jane Eyre is on my list.
Okay, so Jane Eyre, and then what else are you going to do?
I have, what do I have? I have The Dubliners. I have Diana.
Because you sent me the list, and like a bunch of them were ones that I recommended. Because I recommended The Dubliners because I have to read The Dubliners this year too. Because I picked that up in Paris, Shakespeare and Company. What else did you have that was on 1984? I think was on your list.
1984, Fahrenheit 451. I'm pulling it up right now because it's driving me crazy.
It's funny that she said Fahrenheit 451 because I remember my father is part of the reason why I'm such a bookworm. But my father is an over-enthusiastic bookworm when introducing me and my brother and sister to classics.
Okay.
I don't think my brother got it as bad because he's the youngest, but I remember I was in 7th grade and I'd spend my summers in California with my dad and my stepmom, and Fahrenheit, I'm sorry, it was a fountain pen. I always think Fahrenheit 451, but yeah, he was really into the Fountainhead, and he was making me read it the summer of 7th grade. And I remember sitting by the pool, and all my friends are by the pool, and are in the pool playing and splashing around, and I'm sitting at the pool trying to read my chapters for my dad. And my stepmom just looks over at me. She's like, "You hate this book, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You want to put it down and go play with your friends, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Go play. Go."
Oh, lovely.
And he did that to my sister with To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh yeah.
He did that to her when she was too young for To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah. Most high school students are too.
Yeah, well, she wasn't even in high school yet. She was like barely junior high, not even in junior high when he made her read that one.
Well, that one I did.
Are you grateful now?
I'm very grateful now.
Okay.
I don't know about my sister, but I know I'm very grateful now.
So my list, I have Catcher in the Rye, A Wrinkle in Time, It Can't Happen Here, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, The Woman in White.
Oh yeah.
Tess of the Dubervilles.
Good luck.
The Dubliners, The Great Gatsby, Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Okay. So how are these authors booked? Or are you going to be able to get them on the...
Yeah, we're going to get them all on Wine Women Awards. We're going to have a professional seance person come on.
Yeah, we're going to do some channeling. You know, we can bring Liz back on the show and see what she can do.
Good. Well, those are all good. Those are all fantastic.
Yeah, so
I'll send you some more.
Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre.
Yeah, I got a necklace somewhere from Christmas that had Pride and Prejudice script on it.
Oh,
I love those necklaces.
Yeah, it's great. But I hadn't worn it because I was wearing my rose for Miss Rose.
Oh.
To try to figure out how to write this woman who was just driving me nutso. Did your kid go back to sleep?
I don't even know where he is. Is he on the couch? he just got up and walked away, and I was talking to you guys, so I can't be like, all right, bye, I'm gonna go check out my kid right now. But he is on the couch, apparently.
I think mine's asleep. I haven't heard a peep, so.
And mine are still up now, finally. Apparently the boogeyman showed up at the front door.
Oh, yeah, it sounded like it.
Yeah. I mean, damn, these boogeymen showing up randomly at my house.
Well, at least your dogs bark. My dog is like 20 times their size, and he does nothing. He's got like
Napoleon complex syndrome, so.
Oh, yeah.
River, he's a husky, but when he like, if he stands like straight on looking at you and lowers his head, he looks very wolf.
Mm-hmm.
So he has size going for him. Like
Yeah.
people are deterred by his size, but if they actually come up and talk to him and interact with him, he's toothless.
It's kind of like Hanley, I think, most of the book. Hanley is this big. Sorry.
Nicely done.
The guy just reels us back in.
No, I'm sorry. I'm a seminar teacher. That's what you do. No, I'm done.
It's so well done. Yeah, definitely. That's totally Henley in a nutshell. He looks big and monstrous, and at first I thought he was going to be awful, but then over time you just see he's just a big teddy bear.
Big boys.
So, I have another question, and I don't know if you know the answer, but I asked this before in one of our episodes. There is a scene where Hanley and Maddie are separating the letters for the printing press, the tiles or what, I forget the name for them, and the type. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And Dreyfus comes in and he tells Hanley to mind his P's and Q's because he keeps mixing them up. And I thought, is that where that expression came from?
It is. Yeah, it is. It's exactly where that came from. P's and Q's look so much the same. And it's really difficult because when you create type, you place the type upside down and backwards along a metal cassette like this. And so it's very easy to misplace your P's and Q's or B's and D's or a lot of these letters. So yeah, watch your P's and Q's is a printing term that originated. So I just threw that in there. I thought it was funny.
We don't just get drunk and talk books.
You guys are good. You see the details. I'm impressed.
That's all Michelle. I see big picture. Michelle sees the details.
Oh, that's great.
Again, journalist, novelist. That's yeah.
We cover it from all angles.
That's great. What a team.
Well, I do think we are coming up on our hour, and do you have the copy of our next book to show everyone handy? I have it, but it's over there.
It's The Atlantean. It's going to be our first sci-fi book.
Oh, very good.
Mine came today in a box of books and wine, and it was glorious.
Oh, a combination.
So that's our January book, and we are not having an episode next week. We are taking our winter, I guess, break. Mm-hmm. So we'll be back on the 14th. So start reading that. It is The Atlantean by Deborah Pratt.
And if you stayed on and have yet to read Reliance, Illinois, and you stayed on and suffered through the spoilers, pick up your copy now. You can get that now. You can read it, and you can see all the fun stuff that we were talking about.
But there's so much more that we didn't talk about, so you're not. It's not all spoiled. There's plenty still to read.
Yeah, we didn't even touch on Violet. I loved her. She was
Violet.
She was just. I had words with her as I was reading.
I love to hate her. She was so great.
You have to have a nemesis. You have to have a nemesis in life.
You do.
Right?
But, okay, we're going to extend here a little bit. I loved the part when she thought that Violet had stolen her scrapbook, and she basically attacks her for it. And then Rose is like, oh, no, I asked Mrs. Hardrow to do it for me. It wasn't Violet, it was me. And I feel like Violet kind of in that moment became an easy target to pin it on, temporarily at least.
It was like Snape for Harry Potter.
Yep, exactly. Except,
go ahead.
Except not Snape in so many ways.
Yeah,
or Malfoy.
She's fun. I liked watching Violet work. Violet.
I think Malfoy and Violet would have made a good couple.
Oh, I did consider that, and if Georgiana hadn't been so perfect, that would might have happened.
If only Violet had gotten her letters from Hogwarts.
Seriously. Slytherin would have made so much sense for her.
Wow, this book sounds crazy.
People are like, wait a minute, there's witchcraft in this book?
I know, there's
you're talking about suffragettes, right?
Yeah. And there's a seance,
Yeah.
There is. So it all ties in.
Oh, my face hurts. I'm smiling so much.
That's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
All right. Well, we will let you go now. Otherwise, we'll keep talking for like another hour.
Well, this was a pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me on and for reading that book and spreading word about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. It was fun.
Yeah. Best of luck to both of you. Let me know if I can be of any use in the future.
Well, definitely. We've got you set for our virtual literary festival.
Oh, right. Yeah, you'll have to tell me more about that. That sounds like fun.
So you can come and have fun with that too.
Okay. I'm there.
All right.
Here.
Well, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to both of you.
And have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.